Okay, so Be'ezras Hashem, we're going to be continuing with the Goyin and the Tzaddik, Rav Yitzchak Meyer Morgenstern Shlita's Yud Tes Kislev Maamar from this past year, or this year, Tafshin Pei Beis, on the Yom Tov of Hasidus, on the Yom Hotza'ah Legeula from the Alter Rebbe, as well as the birthday of the Maggid of Mizrich. And what we spoke about last night in the first part was the possibility of a revolution or a trans-revolution wherein the body and all that is associated with it, which is very often associated with that which is lower or fallen or destructive, is seen not only as something that can potentially be utilized for spirituality, but rather it's shown as maintaining the crown space, the loftier place in terms of what it means to be a servant of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, what it means to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu in this world, specifically with all of its confines, with all of its constriction, and with all of its physicality. And that was the aspect of matat, that was the aspect of this intermediary space that the human mind encounters, wedged between holiness and unholiness, that place of noga, which is on the one hand the body of Moshe Rabbeinu, yet on the other hand it's the teacher of Moshe Rabbeinu. And the way that the Rebbe was miyashev this kushya was the fact that it is one and the same thing, that the body of the individual, the physicality, the human conditionality, the vicissitudes of human experience is in and of itself the greatest teacher for the human being, because when we encounter Katnus, when we encounter states of constricted mindset, or we encounter states of gullus of the mind, we encounter states of gullus of the mind, gullus of the heart, gullus of the body, it's specifically there that we learn the pathways of serving HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And we saw that the Rebbe was utilizing a distinction made by the Rebbe Maharash, the fourth Rebbe in the Chabad Lubavitch dynasty, who made a distinction between the levels of Ein Doime Lecha and Ein Aruch Lecha. That Ein Doime Lecha is a lower level, because yes, we're aware that there's no similarity between us and the infinite, but that does not negate the possibility that there's some equal playing field where the finite and the infinite might operate in the same terms. Comes along Ein Aruch Lecha and says, no, obviously there's no similarity, but there's not even a point of relation. Now, relation does not mean relationship. Avada, there's a relationship. Our relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu is l'chvaydoi uva'atzmo kavyachol, whatever that might mean, but that's got nothing to do with our capacity to grasp the essence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. When it comes to grasp, ein doime lecha, there's no similarity between the finite and the infinite. And then ein aruch lecha comes along to show that not only is there no similarity, but there's no equal playing field where the two terms can even enter into conversation with one another to be compared. That's the darga of Ein Aruch. That's a higher hasaga, a higher level of understanding the deep infinitude of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, of how profoundly large and infinite the infinite actually is, when we come to terms with the fact that not only is there no similarity, but there's not even the possibility of relating the two terms to one another. And what the Maharash points out, and the Rebbe is utilizing in this Maamar, is that we seem to see a stira here. Ein doime lecha, that level of there is no similarity, which is seemingly associated with a lower level of divine consciousness, because all I'm aware of is the fact that there's no similarity, but I don't yet know that there's absolutely no possibility of even conversation between the terms of finite and infinite due to the infinitude and the infinite nature of all things infinite. That level of Ein Doime is associated with Tchias HaMesim, is associated with the highest level, the Tachlis, and Ein Aruch, which is the higher level of divine awareness, which is the recognition that not only is there no similarity, but there's no conversation between the terms whatsoever, there's no relation between those two terms. That's Ein Aruch Lecha La'olam Hazeh. And so it seems to be reversed, that in the lower experience of Olam Hazeh and human conditionality, when we're stuck in the confines of what it means to be human, we tend to assume that to be a lower place, but the Pasuk tells us and the Tefillah tells us that it's specifically there that we encounter the loftier grasp of Ein Aruch. And Zok the Rebbe, that's exactly what we're talking about. That the Neshama, which is the Darga of Shemayim, which is what we typically assume to be the loftiest level of spiritual engagement, that teaches us Ein Doime. But the body, that which is typically despised, that which is typically thrown away, that which is typically seen as a momentary annoyance that prevents us from grasping HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the idealized way as we imagine it in our infantile spiritual minds is in truth the very site of encountering the deepest hasaga of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which is that we have absolutely no hasaga whatsoever. And it's the Katnus, the Rebbe says, this darga of ein aruch, which is associated with the body, which is associated with what it means to be a human being who lives in this world, who is touched on a certain level by this worldliness, and we lose our chashma, we lose our spiritual certitude. It's specifically there that we have the ability to uncover the deepest lights of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to uncover the lights of ein aruch lecha, which is the recognition of Tachlis Hayadiyah Shaloneda. And we saw how the Rebbe said that our Katnus is our Rebbe, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu sends each and every person a good Rebbe because it's our lower experiences, our difficult experiences, our stuckness that enables us to not only find ways out of it to encounter HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but also in and of the Katnus itself, we learn to find HaKadosh Baruch Hu. This is something essential when it comes to understanding the Rebbe's Torah, that the Rebbe's Torah and the Rebbe's Beis Medrash is ultimately rooted in the Torah's Chacham, is rooted in Rav Chaim de la Rosa, the Talmud Mufak of Rabbeinu HaRashash, which we've spoken about numerous times. But one of the ideas that the Torah's Chacham makes abundantly clear, more so than any other of the Mikubalim, at least on an explicit level, the Torah's Chacham didn't say anything that he didn't glean from his Rebbe, the Rashash, but there are certain times where the Torah's Chacham won't quote his Rebbe Beferish, but he'll say, Ra'isi ben kriche einav, I saw through the creases of his eyes, or libi omerli. And the Rebbe has a whole arichus of understanding and explaining, not understanding, explaining exactly how such a relationship between Rebbe and Talmud could work. But one of the elements that the Torah's Chacham reveals to us is ein siluk moichen la'olam. This is something that's very shaykh to Sfiras HaOmer, in fact, because what we encounter on Leil HaSeder is we experience the highest level of Moichin. We experience Chachma, we experience Gadlus Sheni, we experience a clear and undeniable awareness of godliness in this world, a bitul b'metzias, a recognition that there is nothing but HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and on the next day we lose it. We lose that immediate inspiration, and we're forced to count through those steady, burdensome days of Sfiras HaOmer to reacclimate ourselves, to redevelop our relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, as if we had something, we lost it, and now we have to renew it for ourselves. Zak the Torah's Chacham, that don't, God forbid, come along and think that there was an actual evacuation of Mochin, that the spiritual awareness that we gleaned on Leil HaSeder, that the mind gleans in its unconsciousness, departs in any actual way. Because ein siluk moichin ba'olam klal, there's absolutely no departure of holiness. We know this from the Arizal already, because the Rashash and the Torah's Chacham were only revealing the unconscious within the conscious texts of the Arizal, and the unconscious is always tethered in some roundabout way or explicit way to the conscious text itself. But we know that when Kedusha rests somewhere, even after it departs, it doesn't completely depart, but rather it leaves an irreducible trace. And as our tzaddikim, or tzadok, as we've spoken about so often, have taught us, when a person becomes aware of the irreducible trace of a remainder of spirituality that was once present and begins to seek out that irreducible trace for what was here beforehand, at that moment, it's not just touching the vapors or the residue of that which was present, but we're actually encountering that which was present beforehand, because Kedusha never fully leaves. It always is present there. It just goes submerged, it goes subterranean, and we have to seek it out. So in Sfiras HaOmer, what we recognize is that even though we lost those mochin of gadlus and we find ourselves in a state of moichin de Katnus, nevertheless, moichin de Katnus is not a departure of moichin de gadlus. Lowly consciousness is not the absence of higher consciousness. It's a form of higher consciousness that expresses itself through the lens of lower consciousness, meaning to say that I can look at moichin de Katnus in one of two ways. I can look at moichin de Katnus as an unfortunate departure away from my spiritual enlightenment that I experienced a moment before in a state of expansive consciousness, or moichin de gadlus. And in that sense, the state of moichin de Katnus, of spiritual unconsciousness, is seen as a b'diavad, an unfortunate circumstance of being human, and one that at best I need to learn how to tolerate. And for many people, that is what the guiding principle of spiritual productivity has been. Zak the Mikubalim, and nobody brings this down as clear for us and points to it explicitly in the writings of Hasidus, like the Rebbe, like Rav Yitzchak Meyer Morgenstern Shlita, but we learn a new way of looking at Moichin de Katnus. Moichin de Katnus is not a departure of Moichin de Gadlus. It doesn't mean there's a deficiency. It just means that this status of spiritual experience is seen through the experience of Katnus, that the experience of Katnus itself, of constriction, of limitation, is in and of itself an experience of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, a relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but the framework, the tsura, the shape, the form that that relationship takes is one of small-mindedness, is one of constriction. And that radically shifts the experience of lowly consciousness, which we all find ourselves in. Beforehand, we saw it as an unfortunate symptom of being human. Now that we understand that HaKadosh Baruch Hu reveals himself to us by way of small-minded consciousness, of Moichin de Katnus, and that Moichin de Katnus itself is considered an experience of Mochin in and of itself, it's just seen through a different lens of small-mindedness, of human condition. At that point, the experience stops being so frustrating, it stops being so difficult, and it becomes another opportunity to encounter HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And not only is it another opportunity to encounter HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but what the Rebbe is telling us is that the Moichin de Katnus itself is higher than the Moichin de Gadlus on a certain level. That's one of the secrets that we glean from the Leil HaSeder itself, that the Moichin de Katnus are the essential way of serving HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's serving Hashem with the body. That's our Rebbe. That's the secret of Tzimtzum. That's the secret of the entirety of the Torah, because any Torah, any revelation is always already a Tzimtzum, a constriction, a concealment, a diminution in relationship to the infinitude of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which is above language and any other type of defining spatial or temporal conditions. So what we're going to do is we're going to continue now with the next part of what the Rebbe has said. So the Rebbe says, and now the Rebbe is going to start directing us in terms of how to apply this on a practical level. Ubetchila, and in the beginning, and this is at the bottom of the first page, but tonight we're going to spend most of the time on the second page, Be'ezras Hashem. ובתחילה צריך להאמין באמונה שלמה שכל דבר יש לו שורשים באלוקוס עד שהגוף יכול לגלוס לעצם אלוקוס. First and foremost, the entryway into understanding how the body itself can become the greatest teacher to an individual. And again, what we said is the body is synonymous with this worldly experience and that which typically appears lower on the spiritual hierarchies. In order to see how that can be our spiritual teacher, we first and foremost have to have absolute and complete faith that every single thing in our lives, every single thing in reality has its roots in godliness. It has its roots in the supernal realms, that which takes place down here is a mirror reflection of that which is taking place above, except that the procession from above to below is an infinite gradational process, a seder ha'hishtalshelus, an order of unfolding levels where things congeal from their very fine and refined spiritual status until the point that they congeal and manifest in some form of physical experience. So that when we look at our physical experience, especially as the Baal Shem Tov HaKadosh taught us, mi besari echaze Elokim, that from my flesh, from my body itself, I will come to behold God. The body itself is an expression of that which is taking place above, and it has a root above. And once we get that basic postulate down, we begin looking at our human physical experiences, our experiences down here as human beings, we begin to understand that they are teachers to us. At that point, the guf teaches us how to be masig etzem elokus. It teaches us that we have no hasaga of etzem elokus. It teaches us that ein aruch lecha, that in the end of the day, we have absolutely no hasaga. V'zehu or chadash al tzion ta'ir, and this is what the pasuk means and the tefillah means when we say or chadash al tzion ta'ir, that there should be a new light that descends, that shines forth from within Zion. Now, without getting into the details, this is based on a Maamar from Rav Hillel Paritcher, Rav Hillel Halevi, the Talmud of the Mittler Rebbe of Lubavitch, the second Lubavitch Rebbe, as well as the third Lubavitch Rebbe, the Tzemach Tzedek, who is considered a mashpia in his own right, whose teachings are profoundly potent and powerful, that Rav Hillel Paritcher has a Maamar as a Hakdama to Derech Chaim, to the Mittler Rebbe's Perush, or commentary on the Yamim Noraim, where he describes this idea at length, and the Rebbe has utilized it very often, that there are three levels. There's a level of mitzvos sichos kavana, the notion that in order to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu, I need to have intentionality, I need to focus my mind, and without focus of the mind, I can't serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Then there's a higher level of mitzvos einam srichos kavana, a recognition that my actions are powerful in spite of my mindlessness and in spite of my distractions, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is powerful enough to receive everything from me. And then there's a level above it, which is Or Chadash al Tzion Ta'ir. And that darga of Or Chadash al Tzion Ta'ir, a new light shall be expressed and shining forth from Tzion, is that darga of Keser. That's the higher level. That's the level where we learn that the body itself, that which appears to be lowest, in truth becomes our deepest teacher. And when do we say Or Chadash al Tzion Ta'ir? Zok the Rebbe, Sha'omrim Daika b'makom heichal haschus. We say the tefillah of Or Chadash al Tzion Ta'ir specifically in the heichal haschus. Now we know that there are heichalos that the tzaddikim talk about, and the Yoidei HaMekava spoke about. This is part of the literature of the Zohar HaKadosh, or even a mystical literature, Sisrei Torah, that precedes the expression and the revelation of the Zohar HaKadosh. But we know that there are heichalos, there are chambers, there are architectural spaces of the mind that a human being must encounter before encountering different levels of spirituality. Now, one can see this through eyes of physicality, where a person is magshim, they make it a physical concept, and they imagine actual structures in Shemayim, which becomes very fantastical and very, very often borders the line of Avodah Zarah or infantile spirituality. Or we can understand the heichalos as experiences of the mind, as different processes where a person on their own level learns to have to be mistavik HaKadosh Baruch Hu, different frameworks and spaces through which we see our lives and through which we see our own experience. And the heichal haschus, the heichal of compassion and mercy, is the heichal associated with Birchas Kriyat Shema. And there's something interesting that takes place in Birchas Kriyat Shema, that, as we know, this is the place that Rabbi Akiva was Moser Nefesh. And when a person looks at the heichalos HaZohar and Bereshis and Pekudei, especially with the Bir HaGra and Rav Yitzchak Isaac Chaver on it, we see there that the heichal haschus is the place that is filled with dinim. It's a place that is filled with severity, because it's judgment. It's this space where a person is being judged in this bureaucratic sense of, are you allowed to enter or are you not allowed to enter? Will the gate open in front of you or will it close in front of you? Will you finally make it through the gatekeeper and the watchman, or will you be stuck behind it? And it's specifically in that place that we scream out Or Chadash al Tzion Ta'ir, this recognition that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is present specifically in the lowest places, because that's where the light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu is revealed most powerfully. Shasham yesh dinim. It's specifically there in the place of the body, in the place of tzimtzum, in the place of katnus, in the place of matat, that we experience this darga of Or Chadash al Tzion Ta'ir. Kihu makom hamishpat, that's the place of judgment. And when there's judgment, there's going to be the propensity towards negativity. V'chol ma she'over al ha'adam ve'al gufo kasher ha'adam matchil laha'amin sheyesh sodos gedolos ba'olam. And everything that a person goes through, and everything that the person's body encounters in this world, from the lowest to the highest type of experience, everything that one experiences, once they buy into the belief that everything that I experience down here is representative and is an opportunity for me to encounter that which is taking place above, I begin to understand that there are deep secrets hidden within it. I begin to understand the depths of the secrets, and I begin to learn Torah Lishma. I begin to encounter the Torah for the Torah's sake. I'm no longer a self-serving creature. I begin to uncover the Razin Derazin. It's not enough to learn the secrets. I have to know the secrets of the secrets. The secrets tell me that everything is found in Shamayim, that in order to find HaKadosh Baruch Hu, I have to ascend upwards. The secrets of the secret, which is the Gilui of Torah Chasidus, is the fact that no, I can find HaKadosh Baruch Hu down here even more powerfully than I can find him above. At that point, in accordance with the belief of the specificity and the hashkacha pratis of my experience down here as a human being, I begin to uncover deeper and more essential pathways of service of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, ulazeh tzarich lichanes biyom hazeh l'simcha hagadola. And that is why on Yat Kislev, on the day that the Baal HaTanya was Yotzei Mima'asar, where he left prison for the sake of revealing deeper aspects of Torah, that we have to throw ourselves into this redemptive day of Padam B'Shalom Nafshi with a deep joy, lahavin eich haguf yochel lamed l'galis la'adam eich she'ein aruch afilu l'tchias hamesim. It's through this day, through the Hiskalus of Chasidus, that we begin to understand how it's specifically the body that can teach us the highest level of Hasag of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which is ein aruch lecha afilu l'tchias hamesim, that even in the future when I reach the highest level in the world, I will still be at the opening. I will still understand that I know absolutely nothing whatsoever, because Kedushasi L'Mala Mikdushaseichem, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu's infinitude is above and beyond anything that the human mind can ever comprehend except by way of Emunah. Hine HaRebbe HaKadosh Baal HaTanya. The Rebbe continues and he says, now the Holy Rebbe, the Holy Tzaddik, the Baal HaTanya, Bir Harbe, has spent much time explaining she'ikar avodas Hashem v'sulam ha'aliyah shel kol ha'madregos v'chol ha'aliyos v'chol ha'soida shel razin derazin, that what does it mean to encounter the ladder, the space in which we serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and all of the different dargos and all of the levels of service of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and all the ascension that we experience in our lives and the descent that we experience in our lives, and all of the secrets of razin derazin and Torahs HaKabbalah through the lens of Torahs HaChasidus, as well as in Torahs HaKabbalah itself, especially seen through the writings of the Rashash and the Torahs Chacham. HaKoil hu madrego shabitul. Everything is seen through gradations of self-nullification. The tachlis of Avodas Hashem, the tachlis of Torahs HaChasidus, is to teach a person the secrets of bitul. And the reason I'm not defining the word bitul is because I have no idea what the word bitul means. It's a lifelong process for an individual to understand what bitul means. Tzaddikim know what bitul means. Mashpiyim perhaps know what bitul means. But for myself, bitul is bitul. Bitul is something that a person tries to do and tries to uncover moments of letting go of the self and self-biases and self-obsession and all of the confines of selfhood and egoism. Not because they're bad, not because we're arrogant, God forbid, but because the self is simply a singular expression of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's light in this world. And when we see things through a singular lens, we close ourselves off to the bigger picture. The more mevatel myself I am, the more I'm mevatel myself and I let go of my individualized identity. I let go of my attachments and my connections. I allow myself to suspend my disbelief for a second, to open myself up to the flow and the ever-present nature of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's light in this world, to alleviate myself of some of the anxieties and the concerns that come along with being human. And I open myself up for but a moment to the possibility that HaKadosh Baruch Hu created everything, runs everything, and is present in everything, was, is, and will be. In those moments of bittul, in letting go of the self and opening the self up to the presence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that is the tachlis of Avodas Hashem. Hakol hu madrego shabitul, kamo she'amar hamagid hagadol, like the Magid of Mizrich taught us, kulam bechachma asita, that all levels are created and seen through chachma. And as we're going to see, the darga of chachma is the darga of bitul b'metzias. It means nullifying myself. It's a kayachma. It's when I could say to myself, what am I? I no longer know what my singular and self-conscious identity means. It doesn't mean letting go of the things that we love, God forbid, like other paths teach, but it means drawing all of the things we love and allowing ourselves to be annihilated in the ever-present nature of the infinite light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which has never stopped being as present as it was even prior to the creation of the world. And the Baal HaTanya brings this down in Tanya. I'm forgetting exactly which parak it is. I want to say parak Yud Gimel, but I believe I'm wrong on that. He brings in a Haggadah that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is only shoyreh on a person who is mavatal themselves, and the raya that he brings is a teaching from his Rebbe, the Magid of Mizrich, whose birthday it is on Yat Kislev, the day that the Baal HaTanya was Yotzei Mima'asar, that the Baal HaTanya quotes in the name of the Magid that Kulam b'chachma asita, that everything is contingent on levels of bitul. V'zeh inyan v'yisnachlu oso lahamiso. So we saw yesterday when we were discussing the fact that when a tzaddik understands, when a person understands that the ikar site of service of HaKadosh Baruch Hu is specifically in the body, so then we see that all of the tzaddikim amitim are attacked. We see that the hisnagdus, the pushback against the secrets of revelation that those tzaddikim are revealing, especially the secrets of how the lower is higher and how down here is in truth the dir b'tachtainim, so that's where the attack comes from. And the raya that the Rebbe brought was from the pasuk of Vayisnachlu also lahamiso, that the brothers, the other shvatim, saw Yosef HaTzadik, who was Masalsa B'Sa'aro, who was Yafa Toa Umara, who was beautiful, who understood the secret of the body, who understood the secret of what it means to find HaKadosh Baruch Hu, specifically in Mitzrayim, and the brothers wanted to destroy him. They wanted to hide this revelation. So Rashi says on that pasuk, Ito, what does it mean that they came to plot against him? Ito means imo, it means with him. Klomar elov, it means that it wasn't with him, but it was really towards him. And what the Rebbe seems to be pointing out over here, I don't have not even a full Havana, I don't have a slight Havana, but I'm going to try and read the words as I understand them. So the word elov, the Rebbe is pointing out that it's a conjunction of Aleph Lamed, which is kale, and Yud Vav. And this is already brought down in the Kilos Yaakov, it's brought down in the writings of the Talmidim of the Baal Shem Tov. So what does a love mean? What exactly was it that the brothers were attacking? They were attacking the concept of a love. Why is a love what they were attacking? Because a love is Kel Yud Vav, Shehu Sod Hatzimtzum B'os Yud U'B'os Vav. Now, as we said, what the other brothers, what the world has a problem with is when a tzaddik comes to try and teach us how to uncover HaKadosh Baruch Hu's presence, specifically where it's least apparent. It's when HaKadosh Baruch Hu is found down here in the Dir B'Tachtonim, obviously within all of the confines of what it means to observe the halacha of Hariu LaHashem Kol Haaretz, and not to, God forbid, be pirates together, not to, God forbid, step beyond the boundary, and each person, according to the conjecture of their own heart and their own spiritual experience. So what they were coming to attack was the secret of Tzimtzum. They didn't want this secret of Tzimtzum, this secret of Katnus, this secret of Matat to be revealed. And the Rebbe says that they were attacking El Yud Vav. They were attacking the concept of Yud and Vav. And the Rebbe says that Yud and Vav, the letter Yud and the letter Vav, represent Tzimtzum. Now, very quickly, it's expressive in the writings of the Leshem Shabbat V'Chaloma, especially in the Mittler Rebbe, and it's fleshed out very often by the Rebbe himself, Rav Yitzchak Meyer Morgenstern Shlita, in the writings, especially Tafshin Ayin Daled and Yan HaChachma, in the Maamar on Eitz Chaim B'Derech HaYichud, that while Yud and Vav are typically expressive of osios, of masculinity and expressivity, there is a way of seeing that expressivity and that revelation as Tzimtzum, because we know, as the Ramak taught us, as the Arizal taught us, and as all of the Mekubalim taught us, that ha'elem hu hagilui v'hagiloi hu ha'elem, that the concealment is disclosure and the disclosure is concealment. Meaning to say, when the infinite reveals itself, that revelation on a certain level is a constriction and a concealment of the infinitude that preceded that revelation. Because just like prior to language is possible, there's silence. And when I begin to speak, yes, I'm expressing something, but I'm minimizing the potency of that which existed in the state of silence. So too, any revelation that HaKadosh Baruch Hu reveals of himself is simultaneously constriction. So the osios, Yud and Vav, which typically represent the expression of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, are also seen as tzimtzum, because the expression is also simultaneously like an act of wearing a garment. It hides me while revealing me. It's an act of withholding for the sake of disclosure. And that's what the brothers were attacking. They were attacking the secret of tzimtzum. They were attacking the secret of Katnus. They were attacking what it means to find HaKadosh Baruch Hu specifically in the body. And the Rebbe continues and he goes on as follows. And even though in all of the writings of Chabad Hasidus, they speak about this darga of understanding that we have absolutely no hasaga of HaKadosh Baruch Hu whatsoever, and it's our human experience that forces us to acknowledge that, and therefore it's our human experience that represents a loftier space of spiritual awareness, because we walk around with the deep knowledge of Ein Aruch Lecha, and that there's nothing but you. Harav Rav Aaron Meistra Selya, like it's expressed in the writings of the Tzemach Tzedek and the writings of Rav Aaron Halevi, shemedabrim mehasoid shel hamadrega shel ein od, that they speak about the yichud of HaKadosh Baruch Hu on the darga of ein od. Now here the Rebbe is shifting terms. Now again, this was given over live and it's unedited. When it is revealed, I am sure that it will be filled with immaculate, perfect footnotes, that the wonderful footnotes that describe exactly which Makoros the Rebbe was working on. But for our purposes, now the Rebbe is taking that darga of ein aruch lacha, that awareness of that we have no relation whatsoever to the concept of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's infinitude, and is identifying it with the darga of ein od. Like we say in Aleinu, ein oid efes zulaso. There is nothing other than him, and there is nothing but him. So the darga of ein od is spoken about very often. To reach this darga of recognizing that we have no hasaga whatsoever, there's nothing but HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that's the essence of what it means to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And it's even a higher level of what the Zohar HaKadosh and the Svarim talk about, which is kulo kaima keloi chashiva, that everything is as if it does not exist. That chaf hadimyon of keloi chashiva, as the Tzemach Tzedek points out in the name of the Alter Rebbe, is very essential, because it's not that nothing exists, it's as if nothing exists. But higher than that, as if nothing exists, is the darga of ein od, and that's already spoken about. So nothing we're talking about here so far, says the Rebbe, is too much of a chiddush. And even in addition to this, there are certain places in the writings of the Tzemach Tzedek, sheish madrega yoter gavoa me'ein od. There's even a higher level of ein od, shehu nikra efes zula, based on the tefillah of Aleinu L'Shabeach. Ach ein barur b'diyuk kachiluk min beis madregos elu. It's not abundantly clear exactly what the distinction is between these two levels. And based on these two nearly indistinguishable levels of being masig, the fact that we have no hasaga whatsoever of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it's the two forms of bowing down. I believe that's what the Rebbe is saying here. These two gestures of bitul in the face of Melech Malchei Amlachim are identifiable with the darga of ein od. Nothing exists other than HaKadosh Baruch Hu, as well as this higher darga that the Tzemach Tzedek hints to, which is Efes Zulaso. It's not that there's nothing but him, but there is only him. Efes Zulaso, there is nothing other than him. Lefi Aniyas Daiti, and I want to stop here and I want to say that when the Rebbe says ach ein barur b'diyuk hachiluk ben beis madregos ha'elu, lefi aniyas daiti, if it's ein barur etzel haRebbe, that it's ein barur etzel anybody, and one can possibly say, again, lefi aniyas daiti, that this ein barur, this fact that we don't know with clarity the distinction, is not a diminution of awareness, but rather it is the accomplishment of that awareness. That ein barur, that lack of clarification between these two dargos, is not a symptom, but rather it is expressive and constitutive of that level of awareness, very similar to what Rav Chaim Vital writes about when he writes about the sveikos of Rachel Lois Yada. And when it comes to the highest way of understanding HaKadosh Baruch Hu, in that place of iyediyah legamre, what that represents is I have no idea. So when the Rebbe says ein barur b'diyuk hachiluk, it's not abundantly clear what the distinction in these levels is. It might be hinting towards the fact that that not knowing, that lack of clarity, that inability to know, is actually the sign that points to the way that we experience that level of nullifying ourselves, of koirim u'mishtachafim lifnei melech malchei amlachim. And the Rebbe continues, U'ba'ofen klali, and in a general manner, mevuar b'kitzvei Chabad, what is revealed in the writings of Chabad is that there are three dargos in Avodas Hashem. And again, all of this is going to be there to help us understand the first point that the Rebbe brought out, which is how the body can serve as a loftier site of spiritual awareness and experience than the soul itself, and how that which is lower is in truth higher. And generally speaking, there are three levels described in the writings of Chabad Hasidus and in Hasidus in general. The first darga is the darga of Memale Kol Almin. Memale Kol Almin, which corresponds to Bina, which corresponds to the Yichud Tata of Baruch Shem Kavod Malchus and Voed. That's the darga of Bitul Hayesh. That's the nullification of existence. I exist as a separate being, yet I nullify my separateness with the awareness that I am a created being who is created each and every moment by HaKadosh Baruch Hu. There's an awareness of otherness, an awareness of separateness, but I take that separateness and I nullify it to the unity of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's what it means when we say Mamal Lekol Almin, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu fills all worlds. There is a world, there is separateness, apparent separateness, but it's filled with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's the first darga. Then the next darga, Madrega Hashniya, Hu Bitul B'Metzias. This is the darga of Chachma. This is complete and utter self-nullification. There's no longer a self. There is no longer a world. There is simply absolute nothingness. I negate myself in the face of the fact that all that exists is HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and Al Yedei Hasod Shel Soviv Kol Almin. That's the secret of HaKadosh Baruch Hu surrounds all worlds. And at that perspective, there is no individualized identity. At that point, it's a questioning of the self to the extent that the self evaporates and becomes translucent in the face of the infinite presence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Ulamala mizeh, above the darga of Chachma, hu madrega shel kula kaima k'lo chashiva. That higher level is everything stands in front of HaKadosh Baruch Hu as if it does not exist whatsoever, as if it does not make even the slightest register on the monitor to let us know that something exists. So those three levels of Mamala Kalalman, Soivev Kalalman, and Kula Kaima Kula Chashiva are B'delach Kalal seen as Bina, Chachma, and Keser, of Bitul Hayesh, Bitul B'Metzias, and Bitul B'Tachlis. V'hinei Memalek Almin, when it comes to the first darga, when it comes to that awareness that I am a separate creature, but in my separateness, I negate myself in the face of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Yechaylim Ke'ilu Lirois Be'enayim. We can grasp that. We can see if we meditate enough and we negate ourselves enough and we daven enough and we focus enough and we pretend enough, we can get to that point of living on a level of Mamalek Almin, the recognition that my separateness is not separate, but it's an expression of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The Soivev Kalalman, and the reality that there is no separateness in reality, that I don't even exist, the world doesn't exist, but it's simply an expression of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that darga of Bitul B'Metzias. We might not be able to discern that secret from the body, from physicality, but we can certainly uncover that through the speculative meditation and contemplation of what it means to think about and contemplate the greatness and the infinitude of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and how all separation is not truly separation in the face of the infinite that cannot be manifested in finitude. Ve'amnan. But however, there's a third level. Yesh madrega hanikris efes bilsacha. There's a darga of efes. There's a darga not of bitul b'yesh or bitul b'metzius. It's not of bina or of chachma, but this is the darga of efes bilsacha. There is absolutely nothing other than the presence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. There is no self to be negated. There is no space to be negated. Everything is as still and as infinite as it was prior to the expression of reality. V'yesh chidush miyuchad b'sefer Magin Avos. And there is a chidush miyuchad from the Kapasta Rebbe, from one of the, I believe, one of the sons of the Tzemach Tzedek, who did not become an Admor in Chassidus, but became an Admor in his own right. He did not become an Admor of Chabad, but became a teacher of his own right. And in his writings in Magin Avos, in the Likutim, in Likut Mem Tes, there's a Chiddush that he says that this darga of Efes Bilsacha, higher than the Bitul B'Metzias, higher than the Bitul Hayesh, higher than the Kula Kaima Kalei Chashiva, Shelagabe HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Koil HaOlamis Ki'ilu Ein Bahem Shum Yitzia Klal V'Hakol Kibetchila. There's a way of looking at the world, there's a way of looking at the self, and again, if these teachings mean anything, then they mean everything, and if these teachings mean something for the tzaddikim who are contemplating them, they also mean something for somebody as low as myself who's trying to contemplate them, that there's a way of looking at the world as if there was no process of creation whatsoever, as if things never left their original status of infinitude. infinitude, as if we exist in a non-existent way, the same way that things existed in a non-existent way prior to the creation of the world, prior to anything being manifested. V'dveikus b'bechina zu, and what it means to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu on this level, hu hasoid shel efes zulaso. That's the secret of nothingness completely. There is nothing other whatsoever. Shu yoter gavoa meha bechina shel ein od. That's much higher than the darga of ein od. Now we're going to end here simply because what the Rebbe is setting up, the Rebbe is setting up for us to come to understand how this is possible. How is it possible if we know that HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the world? We know that there was a machshava of Bria. We know that Hashem wants the world. So how could it be that there's a level of looking at ourselves and looking at the world as if nothing exists whatsoever, as if we have never actually left the realm of pure and undiluted, unadulterated yichud and infinitude of HaKadosh Baruch Hu? How is that all possible if we find ourselves in our stark physicality and all of our stuckness in this worldliness? How is it possible that the body itself is going to become the site of revealing this secret of Efes Zulaso? And that's what the Rebbe is going to continue with as we continue. So Be'ezras Hashem, what I hope to do is move on to the third part tomorrow night. And if we don't, then it will be the night afterwards. Be'ezras Hashem.